now I'm now going to turn the table against both of you. Okay? So
Okay.
at this time of social media, don't think you can control me because you control.
Hey, Ileana gets to edit this, so
okay.
It doesn't matter what you do.
I am when I was at your age,
yes,
I asked myself, what am I going to do with the system? Then I realized that, well, in the case of Singapore at the time, when I was then younger than what you were, I say, okay, it's no point having those fanciful ideas if I can't get people around. So I got people around. We had the student union and we start campaigning, and so it doesn't matter. I knew I would end up in jail, which happened. Then more recently, Zoom down to London. Most recently, I realized that, well, there is no dissent in parliament. At least I need to do something. So I did something, and I started the universal common sense, and I try now to build up some alliances of like-minded people. Now, I'm turning against the table against both of you. What are you in your generation, and both being British, going to do about the situation, which is enormous,
Well, really, well, I mean, honestly, this is kind of why I started this podcast, because I could not, like, for example, I just came back from LA last year, and in March last year, they had the biggest protest for Black Lives Matter that they had for decades, you know, and yet Biden was elected as president. Kamala Harris was the vice president, all things that are completely antithetical to what those protests were demanding, you know? And so I was trying to figure out the answers to that question, because like part of it, I think, is this co-opting, like I was saying, the co-opting of certain identity politics in order, instead of looking at what's behind the identity politics, instead of looking at what these movements actually are asking for, just co-opting the language and slogans, then using those language and slogans to prop up the imperial narratives and the establishment agenda. And so part of doing the podcast is just, well, first of all, I realize how ignorant I am. So I do want to like learn and understand from other people, but also to have a place where we can not only have voices, but also encourage other people to look beneath that narrative, which is very prevalent. Once you see the mechanisms behind it, you can start to understand the lies. But so many people are not used to critically thinking when given that messaging. And so this podcast really is about that. Like, how do we encourage and help people to start to see the lies that are being fed to us all?
Well said.
Yes.
Yay! But
I'm glad you answered that, because I was just like thinking in my head, what am I going to say? I think, identity politics, I'm really glad you touched on that. So I think there has been an increase in racial awareness, and you know, we have Black Lives Matter movements. We have this amazing movement in the US called Asians for Black Lives, and I follow them on Instagram, I follow them on Twitter, and there is a lot of talk of racial solidarity. And I think what you need to know is that racial solidarity has existed for a long time, I know we're going to do a whole nother episode on this, but in Vincent Bevans's amazing book that you both read called The Jakarta Method, they talk about the Bandung Conference in Indonesia.
Right.
So this was an Afro-Asian conference. It was part of the non-aligned movement. And this is a solidarity movement between countries of the global South. And this was in the 50s, the 60s. So if you think that you guys, And so if you guys think that you are the first people to promote Black Asian solidarity and you want to put down the previous generation as being anti-Black and things like that, which obviously there is a lot of anti-Blackness in older Asian communities and in Asian communities, but there was such a thing as Afro-Asian solidarity, and it was absolutely crushed by the United States of America in a huge campaign to kill millions of people in this movement, and the government of Indonesia was overthrown for this. So remember that Black Asian solidarity is not a new thing. It's existed for a very, very long time.
And actually, I mean, I think that is a hopeful thing right now when we look at China. I guess you could say vaccine diplomacy, but how China is the only country to build a cold storage facility, I think, for Ethiopia for the vaccines. So, I mean, now I guess that's part of the Belt and Road Initiative. There is, again, like real solidarity. We just don't hear about it in the West.
And the US, the IMF, the World Bank are terrified of the Belt and Road Initiative, specifically because it promotes Black Asian solidarity. So if you want to, I mean, look, I'm not going to spout a pro-China line. I'm not going to take that kind of line, but any kind of direct connection between China and Africa or Asia and Africa is absolutely terrifying for the US because that undermines the control that the US and Europe have over those countries via the World Bank and the IMF. The Belt and Road Initiative is a loans program that competes specifically with the IMF program and the World Bank program, meaning that poorer countries will not need to go to America for these loans. And therefore America will not be able to peddle regime change or control the people who rule these countries. So yes, I'm not going in favor of Belt and Road Initiative. I'm not peddling it, but at the same time, you need to be very, very wary of, if you try and Google Belt and Road Initiative IMF or Belt and Road Initiative, all you will see is just articles about how China is colonizing these countries. But if you just Google IMF colonialism, then you will see a lot of criticism of the IMF and the World Bank and how they use the power of these loans and indebtedness of the global South to control these countries.
Yeah, well, you are right about how those who advocate identity politics often miss the point about the global reality. And my own take, it may be a generational thing, but I tend to view a lot of identity politics is an extension of just the politics of the self, without understanding that we are living in a much global problem, which has issues that determine and affect the individual. Say, like my own generation, at the time, we were very conscious about the Cold War. We were very anxious that we perceive our political context in Singapore in the context of these global challenges brought about by how the West dominate the narrative, how that reflect in our personal context in Singapore political repression. But at the moment, we see lots of, because I go to NGO conferences and so on, and when I was in, say, for example, in Cambodia and in Burma, I find it very strange that some of the activists mostly are all well-spoken in English and so on, which is probably only half a percent of the population. And they will be articulating about transgender issues and so on. And like one of them was raising this question in a conference about the Rohingya refugees.
Yeah.
Are there statistics about how the transgender among the Rohingyas are being affected by this big 100,000 mass of people moving out of Burma? And they were criticizing the lack of statistics to protect the transgender. And I just question myself, have their pursuit of identity politics being so skewed that they are oblivious of world politics, the real power at play? And that is the point that you say about the Bandung conferences, and there is a bigger agenda that people don't see. And, and that is a very difficult, because in the media, we don't hear discussions at that level. It's always at the very minute level, which to the mass of the population doesn't reflect their issues.
Maybe right, and I think like, you know, trans rights are absolutely important, but that's the only discussion that the media will allow in the West.
Yes.
For example, I can imagine the Guardian reporting that sort of, you know, trans rights, and yes, amazing. But where is your talk about imperialism? Where is your talk about regime change? You know, failed regime change attempts. Where is the wider geopolitical context? And I think identity politics, while threatening to white supremacy and the patriarchy, can be sanitized and portrayed through the media in a way that doesn't really threaten the status quo. So, you know, give you know, improve healthcare for trans people. That doesn't really upend, you know, the global the global hegemony. So yeah, I mean, it is fantastic that you advocate for things for the individual. It is great that gay marriage went through, but then you start to see pinkwashing. So so you start to see people making arguments that that Palestine does not have good gay rights, when, you know, in an argument about whether they should be bombed or not, you know, and I've seen that, and I saw that. I forgot India Moore, the trans actor in Pose, who's amazing and very outspoken. She was speaking out in defense of Palestine, and she was saying, "Do not bomb Palestine." And there were people in her comments saying, "Well, you know, they would kill somebody like you," and they were using, you know, her transness and the fact that Palestine may not have the most advanced, you know, trans rights as some kind of defense of the bombing, you know. So for those of us who care about identity politics, we need to understand the greater narrative and also prevent our narratives from being weaponized. And India Moore did this really well, and she just clapped back at them, and she was not having any of it. You know, she, as a Black trans woman, supports the Palestinians, and in fact, your identity and your the ways in which you've been oppressed should help you see through the bullshit of global oppression in this way, and you need to be able to look at the wider non-aligned global South and look to your government and stop them from bombing the shit out of everybody. Thank you very much for coming in, and just to reiterate for, you know, people on the so-called left who identify as leftists or whatever, if you want to know why there are bad working conditions in the global South, if you're curious why there are sweatshops, why people do overtime, why there are dangerous working conditions, know that this is because the US has wiped out any kind of even moderately social democratic leftists, not communists, but a moderate left. The US completely labeled them as communists, propped up dictators to eliminate them. And that's why the working conditions are so bad. So yeah, if you care about leftist issues and you identify as a leftist, then you need to understand how this is affecting the world on a global scale.
And also because it's affecting the US and the UK as well, like with Amazon workers in union. So they're using the same tactics that they've used in the global South towards their own people. It's just more transparent now on every level. So you should
working conditions are getting worse and worse and worse in the West, in the UK, in the Amazon warehouse. If you look at videos of people working in the warehouse, you see them standing up and just working at 1,000,000 miles an hour, packing things, pressing buttons, timed toilet breaks, penalties for not being in earlier than even your allocated time, just like in Sports Direct. You know, all of this unpaid work before and after, all of these things are happening in the West too, and they come from, it's all part of the same
and you
system.
must add the problem with those in the gig economy, which are unrepresented and unprotected.
Yes. Deliveroo, Uber, Just Eat, and I'm sorry to say Deliveroo because you were founded by an American Chinese, so you know, props to you in a way, and I use you all the time. But people working for Deliveroo do not make enough money.
Yes.
So disappointed. See, identity politics, right?
So next time you take an Uber and it brings you from point A to point B, and there's a little rainbow in the trail, and the icon's all rainbow. Remember that if they say, you know, LGBT rights matter or Black Lives Matter, pay these people. You know, pay these people a fair wage.
Thank you, Wei.
Okay.
Shut up, Wei.
No, that was great.
Amazing. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
The Ignoramus' Guide to Surviving Humanity is available as a podcast on Spotify and Amazon Music.
You can also like and subscribe to our videos on YouTube. And if you want to help us grow, then you can become a patron on Patreon. And that's it, right? I think that's it.
Yeah.